Madam Chair, may I ask Tom Livingston a quick question?
Sure.
Tom, I have your notes. Do you want to raise issues as we go through this, or?
No, I think at this point, as we discussed, let's get through this draft and then I can raise some.
All right.
Mostly in the category of nits and sort of
Yeah, no, I got you.
stylistic stuff. Thanks.
And I'll explain how I'm planning on what the methodology is here. So.
What about you, Greg?
Excuse me, are we ready to record?
Yeah, well, I was just, yeah, go ahead.
Were you referring to me?
Yes.
Um,
Did you want to make comments as we go along, or general comments? Are you be able to be with us through the meeting, or do you have to leave, or?
I can stay through the meeting,
Okay,
but any comments that I have, I'll interject, but I'll refer to Tom to lead that discussion.
okay, all right, so we can start the meeting. Good evening. Good evening. This is the opening of the December 21st meeting of the Charter Revision Commission of the City of Norwalk. You have roll call, Chair Patsy Bresham here. Carl
Dickens here.
Okay. Tyler,
Tyler Fairbairn here.
let's see, Angela,
Angela Wasuna here.
okay. Michael Witherspoon. And Benita Watford. Okay, I believe we still have a quorum. We have council with us, Steve Mednick, and President of the City Council, Greg Burnett, and Councilman Tom Livingston. So the minutes have been sent out to the commission and have been made available. So if someone would make a motion to move the minutes, please.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Okay, thank you. Is there a second?
I second.
Anybody have any discussion on the minutes? I had one correction at the end of the minutes. It indicated that we had, were going to be dealing with Articles 1 through 3 this evening. And that is, after that comment was made, we decided to deal with the budget instead. And so that's Article 10 through what?
Just 10.
Just 10, okay. So would those minutes please be corrected, and with the makers of the motion move the question? Any other discussion? All those in favor of accepting minutes as amended?
I'll make a motion. We accept them as amended.
Thank you. Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone oppose? And we have another member of our committee here. That Benita Watford has joined us. Thank you. So tonight we're going to really start looking at some of the details after our counsel, Steve Mendick, has prepared some suggestions relative to the budget process. Steve, do you want to lead us through that discussion?
I'll be happy to. Thank you, Madam Chair. Members, it's good to see everybody. Members of the council, Mr. President, Mr. Councilman Livingston. So I sent out a draft of Article 10. And let me explain, it is a draft. I think I called it a working draft. I should have called it a rough working draft. What I tried to do in this first iteration is to lay out structurally what the order will be. So I've taken the reordered Article 10 and added some provisions, threw in a number of elements that are currently in the ordinance pertaining to capital budgets. We may winnow that down a bit from where it is today, but I wanted to have everything that is part of the process now in this document so that we could go through it and try to come up with an article that will work. We're normally part of my due diligence is bringing in people from other communities But I think what we're trying to do is not change the world. We're just trying to make sure that the document we have, the charter we have, is a readable, usable document. And so we're not looking at massive structural reform. We're looking at basically making the document more literate is what it comes down to, and more facile. And so I will tell you that I do have comments from Tom Livingston that he made on a lot of nits, and there's an awful lot of nits in here. I'll point out for the record. Henry Dakowitz and I spent a lot of time on the document today, and as we go through it, if we want section by section, I will let you know what Henry's comments are as we do go through the document. And so if you'd like, I'll start walking through if you want. Does everybody have it, or do we want to post it? It's probably, if everybody has it,
Copy.
everybody has a copy?
Yes.
All right. So why don't we, if it's okay with you, Madam Chair, I'll start walking through. Also, I found that I missed section 10.3. There's some numbering mistakes, but I'm not worried about that right now. So let's start at the beginning, the budget process. What we open up with is a provision that is a new provision. This is something I recommend. So it's one of those exceptions to the rule, because I do have some thoughts and recommendations that kind of set the table for a budget process. And this is a cooperation clause that I've created in other communities. And this basically says that all the players in the budget process, the mayor, the common council, Board of Estimate and Taxation, the Board of Education, and all of the departments of the city are required to work together. They're required to provide information when the information is requested, and to meet all of the requirements that are set forth either by the CFO, the mayor, ordinance, by the council, etc. And they are required in their work to utilize best practices in the field. And let me stop there for a second. I do try to throw best practice language in all the charters that I can. Henry had some concerns about it, and I just wanted to raise it. And instead of talking about utilization of best practices, we may put an aspiration for best practices. His concern was if we said that we are required to utilize, he's worried, what if we don't have a best practice? What if we are just using a commonly accepted practice? And I thought that was a reasonable comment on his part, but the concept of best practices should come in here. We should be working, as the president of the council knows, as a chair of the finance committee, as a former member of the BET and the Board of Education, he has seen the budget from every angle, which is a very unique perspective. We may not have best practices, but we should be aspiring to the best practices in the field of municipal and public finance. So that is an important provision. It's a table set provision. It was originally designed, I don't think you have this problem in Norwalk, but it was originally designed for communities where there was resistance from boards of education to providing materials and information to the other bodies. They kind of hide behind the fact that they control their lines, and therefore say, why should we give you our lines if you can't do anything with them? But there's case law in the state of Connecticut that requires boards of education to provide any information that budget officials are asking for the purposes of establishing and creating a budget. So the idea is to have a provision in there that is a mandate, so that if there is a resistance, you can point to the charter and try to hold people responsible for cooperating throughout the process. So that's
Steve, on just that very point, I mean, I wonder whether it's worth actually calling out the fact that we need the information, right? I mean, you talk about, working in good faith, which is very abstract general, but I do wonder if that's the issue, whether we should say including sharing information, relevant information, or something along those lines to make it clear that there has to be a two-way communication. There has to be communication across the board.
Yeah, I think that's great. So you want to introduce language regarding the sharing
In good
Of-
faith, including sharing relevant information or something along those lines, right, throughout the year. I think it may be, and again, other board members, please chime in, calling out the fact that there needs to be some exchange of information with all these various departments.
Yeah, that's great.
Well, there is some reference to that further on.
Yeah, you will see language in there, but I have a note on that, Commissioner Wazuna, and I will make sure that concept is as clear as can be, because that's exactly what the intent is. Because the budget season, while the budget season has a calendar that takes you from the beginning to the end of the process,
Yeah.
the budget goes on all year round.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
BET has oversight functions, the council has oversight functions, and a cooperation clause is and the mayor has oversight functions, it gives all those officials an ability to be able to ask for information throughout the course of the year. I think it's a great idea.
I have a question. You define the mayor in the first sentence and have not included the land use committee or planning, the one that goes over the budget. So did you think about that and decide it wasn't necessary?
Well, they're involved in the capital budget. We could put them in here. It was the planning, it's the planning commission, right?
Yeah. Planning, Tom,
Planning and zoning
planning and zoning.
commission, yeah.
What do you think, Tom?
Well, doesn't it fall within departments of the city?
No, but the planning and the reason, and I think it's a very good point the chair has made, Tom. The parties I have named, and they do fall within the departments, but the parties I have named are all players who have.
Yeah,
a
they have
role.
specific roles. I understand. Yeah.
Right.
Planning and zoning has one in the capital side.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So
it's the
this
planning
is-
and zoning commission then.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
And I think it's a great catch, Madam Chair.
Okay.
Thank you.
And then also, who sets the standards for best practices? So-
Well, as I said to Henry, you're the professional, you're the CFO. And so it seems to me the CFO should be keeping up with best practices, should be working with the GL.
Yeah,
the
but my
GLA.
question is, who defines what entity
Yeah.
in our business world defines best practices?
You have best practice, yeah, it's amorphous.
Yeah.
Common, or
Yeah.
I had the same concern, and I was wondering whether it's better to use language along the lines of sort of universally recognized or,
Commonly accepted practice.
yes. Because
That was Henry's recommendation. The
Thank
only concern I have about commonly accepted practice is if the practice is commonly accepted, but it's
and we don't like it. We don't support
not
it.
all that good. Is there what we
Yeah.
want to be? That's why I changed utilized best practices to aspire. So we could probably throw both concepts in there. And I think it's Henry's job as the CFO, or whoever the CFO is, to make sure that in the budget,
Yes.
we're using the best practices we can.
Yeah.
And there's organizations like the Government Finance Officers Association, GFOA, has a lot of best practice standards out there. It may not be possible to do it, and that's why I think Henry did hone in on it and said, let's not make it mandatory, let's make it aspirational. And I think that's important. The council, through ordinance, can
Yeah.
establish a best practice.
Yeah.
If they don't feel,
Excuse me.
Yeah, Tom?
I'm sorry, interrupting. I believe that the auditors every year will also point out what our best practice is. So it's not necessarily something you have to go out and search out. The auditors will bring them up.
So that's why I'm silent on who establishes the best practices, but just to try to move in that direction.
Does
Right?
anyone else have any comments on A? If
No, I
not-
was just gonna ask a
Okay.
question that, I mean, everything you're saying makes sense, but Steve, is it possible to do a footnote at the bottom of the page that says best practices according to whatever that might be?
Well, we don't want to confine ourselves. I mean, there's National Cities, US Conference of Mayors, the GFOA, there are probably chief financial officer organizations. There's probably a number of organizations
Okay,
that do this. I'll look at that and see if there's any further guidance on that. Carl, the concept, or Commissioner, the concept is a good concept. And I do put footnotes in charters very often to say at the present time, this is the standard or whatever it may be. If there wants to be an annotated reference, but let's, but I'll think about that, and you should think about that as well if we think it's useful or necessary.
Okay,
Okay.
before we go on to B, well, would you, when you speak, would please identify yourself?
Oh, I'm
so it
sorry.
Makes it easier for the woman taking or whoever's taking the minutes, okay?
Okay.
All right, so we go on to B. which
Steve Mednick here.
Steve,
Uh,
you can say your-
Then the next is just a
Yes.
recitation of the fiscal year standard, which is a recodification that's in the current charter.
Anybody have any comment on that? Okay, I'm seeing.
Madam Chair, this is Tom. The only thing I'll note, and this is going to come up throughout, is the reference to the taxing districts, which we just need to think
Oh,
about, go through this.
Yeah, yeah, let's talk about that for a second, because Henry said that, and I said, well, that's in the current language. So are we absolutely comfortable? And we'll see this in other places in the document. I'm sorry, I didn't yellow that one. I tried to yell it wherever I noticed it, and I missed that one. With taking them out of that they're not really governed by our charter. Is that correct, Tom? Or
Yeah, it is.
Oh, Tom, you're recommending that they come out.
Yeah, well, let me be clear about that. I mean, there's some provisions in here about the taxing districts. I think Steve and I have spoken before about this and whether it makes sense to put those particular provisions as an appendix or something like that. But for most provisions, we should take it out, if not all. I think we have to walk through it to make sure we
the
do.
fiscal year, because we're not governing, there's, as Henry indicated to me today, about the only thing that the city does for the taxing districts from an administrative point of view is provide administrative and collection services for some of their surcharges, some of their additional taxes, so that they don't fall within the budget parameters at all, and they probably should come out. So I'll take it out here. You'll see that deletion in the next draft.
Okay. All right, we're ready to move on to C, budget of public record.
This is new language, and in both 1 and 2. And the idea of this language is to make it clear to the public that this is a public process. One of the things you'll see in language I will provide you with when we get to boards and commissions, it's a good example of what I'll do, is to really state what is a board and commission. Boards and commissions don't serve the mayor's interest or the council's interest. They're here to serve the public interest. And so the idea here is to really establish a kind of a benchmark that this document, it's subject to public inspection under FOI. That's a given, but to have our document state this is very, very clear. Tom did raise a question about physical copies of the budget to be provided within 72 hours of submission. And the question is, I mean, if you have 25,000 people asking for a physical copy of the budget, under FOI, you're allowed to charge. And so, we could probably put subject to some provision that would allow for the charge for such physical
Yeah,
documents.
reasonable charges, perhaps.
Yeah.
I also, if I could keep interrupting you, sorry, Steve. Does the last clause here is something we also need to think about is, to what extent we define what constitutes notice in essence. And so this says providing access online through social media, website and dashboards. I think I look at this, I think this is fine today. I just don't know what it looks like 10 years from now. And that's why I always like to think about whether we put a catch-all provision about notice in this document that we can look to whatever the appropriate form or best notice at that time.
Well, as we go further in the document, you will see on page, why do I have no page numbers on this? In section 10.6, which is really 10.5, I have definitions of meeting notice and public notice. And so, we could, let's see, access online media dashboard. And so there will be a common definition of notice. in the charter.
Right, that's what I was thinking you might want to use here.
Okay, that's a good point, because I remember reading in some of this work that the public libraries were also included. So I think we should have one standard phrase that we use throughout the charter for public notice. I can't remember where that is, but I'm sure we'll find it tonight as we go through this.
Oh, no, you'll find it in my definition of notice.
Okay.
Public notice, yeah, shall, so instead of provide access online, says the mayor shall provide, public notice, you know, all right, I know what you want to do here, so let me.
Yeah. Would you think in terms of just referring it to the section where public notice is defined?
Yeah.
Would that be more
Well,
efficient?
it's going to be defined up front. Yes. Yep, we can fix that. Make sure it's,
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is Angela, Commissioner. Wasuni.
Angela?
Yeah, I think the goal here is to make it as broad or to capture, you know, to Tom's point, whatever might come down the pike. So maybe not being so specific in terms of each and every channel, because as you said, Patsy, there's libraries, etc. Is there a catch-all phrase that can sort of demonstrate the intent and that will use those channels as appropriate?
got you. So it'll be basically, the mayor will provide notice of the availability of all documents for public inspection.
As per section, whatever it becomes.
It'll be capitalized, so it's a defined term. We could refer to the section.
Yeah, that would be helpful, I think, throughout,
Okay.
because then
Gotcha.
it's clear and it's all the same and
Got you. All right.
eliminates any potential differences. Okay, anything else here? In one? I see no one raising the hand, so we can move on to two.
In two, we should add again, before the chair tells me we should add it, Planning and Zoning Commission should be added as one of the entities that is involved in developing procedures designed to encourage public participation in the budget process. And you'll see later on, as a result of Henry and my discussion, I saw nothing about a public hearing with the Planning and Zoning Commission. We do make a reference that they should have a public hearing during their process. They probably do, but it should be a constitutional standard. So planning and zoning should be added into the public engagement section.
Okay, all right. Does anybody have any comment on that? Yeah.
Steve, Tyler Fairburn, for the public engagement, you were leaving it to the mayor, the council, the BT, the board to develop procedures. Is there any need to put in a requirement that those procedures themselves be reviewable for the public? Otherwise, are you in a situation where, you know, they have their own procedures, but they're in a binder or on someone's computer and people aren't entirely aware what those procedures are to engage the public? Or is that?
Why don't you say develop and publicize procedures designed?
I think that would be helpful. Otherwise, you find yourself in a situation where they just kind of, well, you know, we're doing it this way and that's the way we say it is. And,
Yeah.
and people aren't able to see how they can engage.
I'll say at the commencement of the budget process. So that everybody knows.
Well, does that mean that it can change every year?
Procedures could change. You could always modify procedures.
Which I think is probably fine if you, I think the develop and publicize could be important there.
But who modernizes or who changes the procedures if you can do that every year, Steve? What would be the process of that?
It really would presumably, I suppose maybe what we do is if in the next section, subsection D, is the budget calendar, and you'll see that there's at the end of the budget calendar, I have a 1, 2, 3, etc. because we don't know what the elements are until we finalize what the process is. But maybe one of the elements of the budget calendar is agreement on procedures by those parties at the beginning of the budget process when the budget calendar is issued. So if there's going to be changes in the procedures, they would be made and publicized when the budget calendar is released.
Yeah, but because I only asked the question because if we go down that road where it can be changed, and you get different people, of course, coming and going, and it gets changed, all of a sudden, this starts to have, like the current charter, although it wouldn't go back 100 years, but everybody has a different opinion at a certain time, so the language would keep changing, and because our intent, we keep talking about, is to make this easier, more transparent, and something that can be referred to with some clarity.
Well, the other thing you can do is another way to simplify it completely is that the procedure should be established by ordinance. And so you have an ordinance that lays out the procedures. If you want to do that, which means that everybody has to come to the council and have the council approve the procedures. And if there's a need to change the procedures, you change the ordinance. That's another approach.
Mhm.
Greg, I wanted to ask, with your experience with the Board of Estimate Taxation, have you had change procedures every year, or have they been standard?
This is Greg Burnett. The procedures have been fairly standard in terms of once we set the budget calendar and we make the budget calendar available to the public. We have, for the most part, followed that calendar
Yeah,
in terms of ensuring that the public is aware of when public hearings will take place, the procedure in terms of how to participate in the public hearing. During the actual hearing, at the beginning of the hearing, we read the procedure in terms of how you sign up to speak, how much time you have to speak. So we have not had to, I'll say, change that. The only change, which is not just unique to us, but everyone, I would say in recent day has been going from holding it in public to having it virtual, in that we utilize Zoom. But the procedures of participation would be reviewed with the public at the start of the public hearing.
I just have this gut feeling that if we don't make it simple and clear, it could confuse people to think that it's going to be a moving target every year.
I
with the
agree.
budget. And I think that's a very negative feeling to have out in the community. Our goal here is to bring people in and make it clearer, and that sort of opens the door. So I don't know how we close that door, but I think it's a concept we need to.
What if we lay out that the procedures need to be released with the budget calendar?
It'd be
Include,
helpful.
include the procedures when you release the budget calendar, so everybody knows at the beginning of the season what the rules of engagement are for the year. Even if there are changes, which there may be,
Mhm.
that at least it's included in the budget calendar.
You wanted to make.
Yeah, Benita,
Benita?
Rockford. I guess what I'd like to know is what are the procedures? I mean, I know that you want to make this broad and something that'll last over years, but if I'm reading this, it shall develop procedures. Well, what are they? I mean, can we get anything down that would, I mean, as
Well-
I'm looking at this, I'd like to know what are the methods that you would.
Well, remember, this is a constitution, so we don't want to we don't want to tie everybody's hands with procedures that can only be changed with a charter revision. And so to me, the best example, I'll defer to the two council members who are here. I assume that there are rules and procedures of the Common Council that the council approves or adopts at the beginning of its cycle, which most legislative bodies have. I don't know if BET, I could ask the president whether the BET has them, or planning and zoning. Whatever they have is they establish procedures, procedural rules for the conduct of their meetings. That's all I'm talking about here. Because the procedure for how the budget works is in the charter. So you submit, it goes to this group, it goes to that group, there's a public hearing, it goes to another group, somebody sets a cap. Somebody then deals with the line items, somebody, whatever it is. All those procedures are clearly laid out in the charter. I'm talking about meeting procedures for the purposes of encouraging public knowledge and public engagement. And so I'd be reluctant to advise you to write those in stone in a charter. What I was simply trying to say here is that they should be there, and to Commissioner Fairborn's point, they should be publicized so everybody knows what they are. And then leave it up to the bodies to establish the procedures. If the council, which has legal authority to create law by ordinance, thinks that there's a problem and wants to have an ordinance as to how the Planning and Zoning Commission should conduct their interchange with, or their exchange of information with the public, they could always do that if things are not working. So that's always a safeguard that's out there. But I think that if the procedures are publicized and they are released at the beginning of the budget, when the budget calendar is released, and you'll see there's going to be a big change there that Henry actually recommended, that instead of having it come out the first council meeting in January, Henry's recommending that the budget calendar be released in October, so that we're even creating the process earlier in the year, and the procedure should be in place. Members of the public should know where the pressure points are and when they should be expected to be participating in a process to observe and to comment on the different stages of budget development. So I'll leave it up to you on that, but I think that the body should be allowed to establish their own internal working rules, is what I'm saying. This mandates a standard that they have to have procedures that encourage public engagement. I think that that's the important thing, outreach.
Maybe.
But it encourages public
What-
engagement, but then
Carl,
they have to.
Carl, will you please identify yourself when you speak?
Oh, okay. And I thought since the names are up there, but
Well, no.
yeah, it's Carl Dickens. So I agree with you, Steve. I think where it gets a little bit wild westy is that then when it gets to be not standardized, or the different bodies who are touching documents, making decisions, can then go within their own group and make their own rules. That's what I kind of heard. Maybe I didn't hear that right.
No, I think that's right. I think that everybody's going to have procedural rules, but what we do here is we say that the rules need to be focused on encouraging public participation. And so I think if the council is paying attention and they don't think the BET is, and I'm not trying to pick on anybody in particular, the Planning Commission does not have rules that really encourage public participation, whatever that may mean in terms of outreach. How do they reach out to the public? How do they publicize their meetings and their hearings? Then the council always has the stick of passing an ordinance that establishes a procedure to govern that portion of the budget procedure.
But that would have to be done in advance, though. wouldn't it?
Carl,
Dickens
that's you again, right, Carl?
Yeah. Yes.
What was your question?
Well, my question is that would have to be established sort of before, so that the parameters of whoever is leading that group then would do that. I mean, I only, because you're on a hot topic, obviously, within the city with the P&Z thing you're talking about. And I think a lot of perception, and with our two council members here, you'd know better than I. But I think sort of the perception in this town right now is that when P&Z is doing stuff, that they don't really hold public meetings, or do they have to? And whether it's fake news that's put out that says by certain people that like social media a lot, because they like to see their name in lights, is to foster things that aren't true. And the more I think we can get it down black and white and locked down, that negates that, where any one of us or the mayor or anyone else for that matter could simply respond to those people and say, refer to document, charter, section 10.2, whatever it might be. This is how it's done. And I think that it opens up a window, though, that if it's not that locked down, that then if whoever's running the P and Z at that time or is appointed is on it and decides, well, I don't like the way that it used to be run by Tyler, so we want to change this procedure. So then it comes out to where, well, that was the procedure 2 years ago when Tyler was chairman of the P and Z commission, but now he's gone and, you know, somebody else is in there now and they want to change it. And that's where, because of lack of coverage that we have in this town on media and communicating with the public, I think there becomes a loss of faith or whatever you want to call it, of people being told really what's going on. Well, yeah, you got the charter, but then again, the procedures were changed 2 years ago.
Well, maybe Steve, you could try to come up with something that will tighten that up for us and we can come back to it rather than try to write it tonight.
Correct. I mean, I'm sorry. I just think that's a
No,
hot.
that's why I brought it up, because I'm concerned about people misconstruing the process or not having faith in the process.
I mean, this is Carl Dickens again. I don't know how many other people were, but you know, we just had a long meeting 2 weeks ago where we talked about the procedures of how the capital budget and the operating budget and how that all came about. And then bam, I open up Nancy one morning and I see that the school board's asking for an additional 32 mil. And I'm just trying to clarify this in my own mind. Well, how does this get out now when a lot of the pieces that we talked about that had to go through, and I think I had asked Greg this last time about it, all this stuff goes through that before they get to it to even give a thumbs up or down on it. There's already this thing out there that, I don't mean a thing, but there's this item out there and it's the board and they're asking for an additional $32 million. And I think that's where a lot of the citizens then start to go, how does that happen? How did they get to that point? And what's the prospect of that? And how do I speak against that? Or how do I change it? That's all I'm saying. I mean, I just think we have a huge lack of communication in the city.
Okay.
And I'm not picking on
Anybody
anybody.
else want to comment on this before we move on? Okay, so we'll come back to this when we finalize this.
I'll try to tackle the issue.
Yeah.
I'm going to try to tackle it though with a lighter touch than a heavier touch, unless you tell me otherwise. You'll see what I come up with, and if we need to go stricter, we'll have time to do that as well. But I have some good notes on this.
Okay, so B, we're on B now. D. B. 10.2B, submission of general funds.
We were talking about C, the budget and public record. I don't know that we got to D yet, did we, Dave?
We're going to D, which is budget calendar,
Okay.
Right.
which I kind of alluded to a moment ago.
Right.
Again, the major outcome, there's two things. One, it's the Office of Management and Budget. I may take the reference to the department out of there, but the other thing is Henry suggested that the calendar be issued not later than the first council meeting in October of each year, so that as early as October, when his department starts soliciting information, everybody knows what the calendar will be through May. And I think that was a really good idea. I've not done that in any of my charters with a start date that early, even though most budget officials do start that early. I thought it was a very useful thought on Henry's part.
Thank you.
Any
Any comments from any of the commissioners?
Tyler,
Yeah,
Fair-
Tyler.
Sure. Steve it, but I think it would probably helpful to do, how you have CFO or equivalent official would be to have, if we're gonna have it in there, say, OMB or equivalent department responsible for.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. So now,
And also, I'm going to include in here the procedural rules need to be set by that date as well. They need to be revealed. That'll be part of what I
Published or
published and publicized. Yeah.
by the October
Yeah.
date.
Yep. And the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, that'll still be blank until we finalize what the procedures are. That will be blank, but you should know that that is going to be probably 10 or 15 key dates, and they'll be broken down by the general operating side and the capital side. So there will be more language in D when we're finished with this.
Okay, so now we move on to annual budget estimates.
Yep, section 10, yep.
10-2.
10-2A. Thank you, Steve Mednick, again for the record. So the first thing is, no, that's in B. There's language here, and I want to make sure everybody agrees that the yellow language regarding the committees, officers, and departments of the several taxing districts under who control money is expended should be deleted. They're not part of this process. Is that absolutely correct? Everybody's, Tom, Greg?
This is Tom. Yes, that would be correct from my vantage.
All right.
So I just need to ask for clarification. And this is where it gets tricky in Norwalk. So the taxing districts, are we talking about the service districts here, really, but it's not clear? Or we're not talking about the service districts?
Service districts as opposed to I think the taxing districts are service districts, aren't they? I mean, they're called taxing districts. Some of them do water, some do electricity.
No.
Clarify.
No,
Clarify for me.
that's
Like
my
a special,
point.
like a special service district, like a downtown district or something like that. Is it?
The districts get different services. Water is not within those districts. The water comes from actual taxing districts, the first and the second taxing districts. So these should be service districts, people who are getting sewer, garbage collection, streetlights.
If I might, this is Tom again. I think what this is referring to are the separate legal entities, if you will, that administer and provide those services. So like the first, second, third, and sixth all have separate charters, so to speak. And the first, second, and third provide services. The sixth doesn't really. So they are, I don't think they're not all service districts. I don't think. I'm not sure the use of that term myself.
Well,
Each of these districts is spelled out in the charter, this reference.
okay, but I don't think this is clear here. And that the point that I'm trying to make, it's not clear to us. It's not clear to anybody out there. So how do we make it clearer? And people's tax rates are different based on the services that they get from the city of Norwalk, outside of the first taxing, first, second, third, and sixth.
This is Tom again. I don't want to speak for Steve, but taking it out of this section is really, this section is really not the issue because this is just setting up the city's budget. I don't think that really plays into this, but because this section doesn't deal with, the city doesn't get its estimates from the taxing districts, right?
No, yeah, but what, I guess I'm just not making myself clear. So when the Board of Estimates sets the taxes based on services, maybe Greg, you can answer this best of all, they are different. If you're in the fourth district, you are getting sewers. If you're in the fifth, you're not. So your taxes are a little different, correct? There's a different rate.
This is Greg Burnett. That is correct.
Right. Yeah, and that's my point. And so it is relative to this, but these are service districts, not taxing districts.
This is
I don't
Greg
know how
Burnett.
we- yeah.
I'm kind of stuck on that term also, service districts. I can't remember it being referred to them as service
Okay.
districts. It's the taxing districts seems to be the more common term utilized.
Yeah,
So-
this is Carl Dickens. I think if you'd ask most people, when you talk to them about the districts and you said taxing districts, I don't think it goes through their mind, although they should read their taxing or their bill, but when they're assessed, when the mill rate's set and what they're gonna pay, I don't think it goes through their mind that what they're paying the taxes on is on, do I get city water, do I get city sewage, and does it also include trash pickup?
Well,
I don't think
but
the
that's the
average citizen
point,
thinks
that
that way.
that our charter should explain that.
Yes.
And if I
And-
might, again, this is Tom again. The problem, one of the problems in the charter is you have the first, second, and third, and sixth, which are loosely their own entities. And then you have the fourth, which is like just a category, so to speak, almost. So they're not, it's like apples and oranges within the term that taxing districts. They're not all the same thing. And that's one of the problems.
But then let's go to the fifth, and Craig, maybe when you set taxes for the people living within the fifth who are not getting sewer service, how do you define that? How did the Board of Estimate call that?
Greg Burnett. We look at each of the services that this is where services do
Yeah.
play in. We
Right,
look at the services that are being provided within each of the taxing districts to determine how the mill rate and the tax distribution will take place across all of those districts.
and they're different, correct? Based
They are
on,
different.
and based on what services they get.
But my understanding, because I went through this with Henry today, because I was trying to understand this, because I know it's an issue of concern to you, Madam Chair. This is Steve Mednick, I'm sorry. And that is, these procedures in the charter are designed to request from the departments of the city the information that the decision makers need to distill and act upon to establish a budget and create a mill rate of the services being provided by the city, by city departments. My understanding is that whatever services are being provided by the taxing districts are determined by the taxing districts. And that the role the city plays is not determining how much people are going to pay those districts for the service that's being provided, but whether how a bill goes out, because I guess they collect for those districts and they add to a tax bill that's created on the basis of this budget an amount that passes through the city and goes to the taxing districts. So this procedure is not a procedure, to my knowledge, that the taxing districts utilize. They don't present their budgets. They don't present their budgets to the CFO, to the mayor, to the BET, and to the council. They don't operate under the cap that the council establishes. They make their own decisions, and any money that's collected by the city is not, there's no judgment on the part of the city. The city simply adds it to the tax bill, but I don't know if it's added as a surcharge, whether it's distinguished somehow, but I don't think it's part of this procedure. And that was the reason when I spoke to Henry today, and my understanding of it, that we were planning on taking taxing districts out of this process because they're not part of the process. They don't introduce their budgets to.
Yeah, well, Greg, can
This
you
is
address
Greg-
that?
Yeah, Greg Burnett. What we're addressing in this budget estimate section, we're addressing what revenue does the city need to obtain to provide overall services to Norwalk residents. The taxing districts define where an individual lives, the value of their homes within those taxing districts. Some districts have higher values, others have lower values. And the tax distribution is the overall tax distribution is determined within the residents, the values within those different districts. So we are not talking the services that the taxing districts provide. We're talking about the entities that reside within those districts and the revenue needed to generate the overall resources to provide overall city services.
Okay, when you say.
That is how the
overall,
word
yeah,
that is how the word taxing districts are
is-
utilized in the budgeting process to determine how much revenue the city generates to cover the necessary expenses.
Okay, let me just give you an exercise here. So when the Department of Public Works presents their budget, they're looking at is the sewer service within the city in their budget, or is it a separate budget? Because everybody in the city of Norwalk doesn't have the same level of service.
Correct.
They don't have sanitary sewers. They're not-
Neighbors don't
They're
have.
not tied into the city's sanitary service system.
Greg Burnett.
People in the fifth are not, don't get that service.
Greg Burnett, the DPW will present a budget based upon the services that they provide to the city.
But they don't provide that service to the fifth people living within the fifth.
And that's okay. I mean, the question that you pose is DPW, when they present the budget based upon the services that they are providing across the city, wherever they provide services.
So, all right, let's go to the fire department. So the fire department budget comes to you, and that does not include the 6th district, correct?
Greg Burnett, that is correct.
Because they have a voluntary fire.
Again, their budget composes whatever services they provide to whatever
Right.
areas across the city.
Okay, but not inclusive of everybody in the city. And that's the concept that I'm trying to get us to articulate so that people don't construe that system with the actual taxing districts that have their own legislative history. The 1st, the 2nd, the 3rd, and the 6th. So I guess I'm out there all alone here.
No, you're not.
And that's-
I understand and agree with you. Carl
Pardon?
Dickens, sorry.
But they're not part of the city budget process. They have their own process, as Henry explained it to me. And the charter is dealing with the departments of the city. The taxing districts, I don't believe, are considered departments of the city.
They're not.
And so by taking them out, they're on their own. The city has an arrangement where they collect for them, but they're not part of the budget process. And hence, that's why we would delete the yellow language dealing with the taxing districts, and the budget would be silent on them because they're not part of the budget process.
Oh, Greg Burnett. So where are we stuck here? Are we stuck on the use of the
Yes.
term taxing districts?
Well, I think
holding this
it's
up?
not understood. Yes, I think that's a big part of the problem that we need to try to clarify. What is the taxing districts and what are the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 6th?
But this is a section that creates an authority to ask departments to submit their budgets.
Yeah,
And in the current charter, there's authority asking the taxing district to submit their budget. I don't think we do that. I don't think you do that.
We
Correct me if I'm
don't.
wrong.
We don't.
So if
We
we
don't.
So if we don't, that language should come out is the point. I think that, yeah, that's the only point I'm
If it's
making.
coming out, we don't need to worry about defining it here at all, right? Because it's not going to be referenced. At least relative to this part in establishing the budget or the budget process. Because they're not coming in with the department heads to ask for lines or what have you.
This is Carl Dickens. That makes sense. But my thing that keeps sticking in my head is that if I'm running Department of Public Works and I'm asked to give to Henry what I think I'm needing for an operating budget for next year, what do they look at to build their budget up that then gets submitted in the overall operating budget? Because there may be districts where they supply more service that those people pay for than other districts that some of those people don't. I mean, for example, right where I live, my next door neighbor has a well, so he has city water. I mean, he doesn't have city water, he has his own water. I have my own septic tank. I'm not on the city sewage system. So I don't know, how do they look at us to figure out what our tax bill is going to be? Is it just strictly based on the property value, not services that's intertwined with that? I mean,
Well,
and then, so.
can I point out that if you go the next page, in subsection B3, which will actually end up being B4, Henry wants to add a section, we
Okay.
do ask department heads, the Public Works department head, that they have narratives in their budget request regarding performance measures, service levels, differentiation of services to residents of the city, both in terms of policy and service design, and priorities of the planning, budgeting, and management of public services, including compliance with the POCD. And so we're asking department heads to lay that out.
Okay,
But it's up to the taxing districts to communicate with their constituents on the services that are being provided there. It's not part of the budget. And that's what I've been led to believe, and that's one of the reasons I've recommended, that's why I put it in yellow and thought it had to come out.
okay, so.
Let's go back to Carl's idea there with the well and the sewer.
Well, and
The
if I
city of
might,
Norwalk does not provide water service. It is two taxing districts that own the water and provide it. And so,
Madam Chair? if I
yes,
could- I just-
Tom,
Yeah, just because I think the water gets confusing because some of the taxing districts provide water. If I use the example of the fire department that you brought up a minute ago,
right,
the 6TD has a volunteer department. So my understanding of the process, we went through this, we go through it every year,
right,
is the city comes up with the cost of providing the fire services throughout the city. Then they go and look at that and they back out the resident, the homeowners in the 6TD and adjust it to everybody else. That cost is split up among a slightly smaller portion of the population,
right.
carving out, and that's how it's done. And I agree with Steve that the taxing districts, no matter, I mean, however you end up defining them, aren't even relevant to this section because they don't provide the estimates.
okay. All right, Greg, how do you feel about that? Is that with all your experience on the Board of Estimate?
That, Greg Burnett, that is correct.
Okay, okay. All right, any other comments on this section?
Well, let me just point out one more thing that Henry, I'm sorry, so everybody has a full understanding what Henry had requested. He wanted to make it clear, there's some language in there that talks about estimates of revenue and expenditures. He wanted to make sure that it was estimates and requests for expenditures. He didn't want it to be a given that those are the expenditures. So there's
Yeah.
requests for expenditures. So I'll
That's
have some
that's a
clarifying
good
language on that.
catch. Yes,
Yeah, it was a very good catch.
okay. Any objection to that? I see none, so we can move on.
Maybe just, this is Angela, this is maybe just nitpicking, but where you have the phrase in the judgment of the mayor, I mean, do we need that? Because these documents would be requested by the mayor and we're saying they're necessary to discharge the duties imposed. So I would just be in favor of striking that off because it's implied anyway. And when you bring in judgment, there's a discretionary element there, which I don't know if we want.
Any comments? Anybody else? Steve?
I don't have a problem with the language in or out.
Okay.
It's ultimately all the mayor's actions are discretionary unless they're mandated somehow. So it may be redundant. Angela, the commissioner, may be correct on that. So I don't think it.
It's just, as I said, it's nitpicking, but
Yeah.
I'll just take that out.
Look, I think we should have this language as plain and clear as we can. And if this doesn't add anything that is otherwise in there, I have no quarrel taking that language out. One
Does
thing you'll find
anybody-
for me, there's no pride in authorship, kids. There's no pride in authorship on this stuff. So I'll take that out if there's no objection.
I see none. So let's do that. Okay. Anything
Okay.
else? All right, let's move on.
So subsection B, this actually was a request I made. I want to make sure, and again, remember, this is the first rough draft. I want to make sure we're using consistent terminology, consistent language throughout this. And I saw in some places we talk about general fund and we talk about operating. And so Henry and I decided that recommend, we'll look at it and you'll see what it looks like when I give you the draft back, that it will be submission of the general fund operating budget. And we'll probably have a short way of referring to it so that thereafter we'll just call it the operating budget or the general fund. We'll have to figure out what that's going to be, but we wanted to define it so that all those terms are all linked and that they all come into play in that section. So that's kind of a window dressing issue, but I wanted to point that out to you. Henry is okay with the date as it is, and these are on or before dates so that when you establish the budget calendar, you can establish a firm date. You just have to make sure it's on or before the charter date. That's the real key. And he changed that to December. He recommends that those estimates come in December. And again, the taxing district would come out of that section. Then the elements that go into it are the elements that are laid out below. So do you want to stop at that paragraph before I get into 1, 2, and 3?
Does anybody have any?
Steve, this is Carl Dickens. Just a quick question as I'm
Yeah.
thinking back. I remember in a previous meeting, there was a comment made that the BET has its own charters. That they've drafted their own charter and maybe amended their own charters and that sort of thing.
The taxing districts,
Yeah, the BET itself.
the
Board of
BET,
Board of Taxation.
Yeah,
they may have rules, but this is their
Okay.
charter. This is their charter. They're
Okay.
an agency, an entity of the city,
okay.
right?
Well,
One other
so,
thing, he wanted to make sure that the word
Greg has a question. Greg?
Oh, yes, Greg Burnett. On item B, you indicated, Mr. Dakowitz indicated to possibly move that date of January 15th up until December.
15th.
yeah,
I think we need to really take a close look at that, especially in light of one of the largest areas of submittal is the Board of Education. And this gets back to Mr. Commissioner Dickens' statement about why is the Board of Education sharing their budget requests now? Because their process calls for the superintendent and the chief financial officers to come up after they've solicited all of the schools, all of their entities, to come up with a budget request amount. And then they present it to the Board of Education. And then the Board of Education reviews that and comes up with the Board of Education's suggested budget submittal. And then the Board of Education's submitted budget is what is then brought forward to the city. So the Board of Education, again, taking into account, they take up a large percentage of the operating budget. They need a longer runway to get the input, review the input, review it with their board separately. All of the other departments do not have boards. The the chief of that department receives input from their department heads. They synthesize that information, they meet, and then they come up with a budget submittal to the finance department. The Board of Education's process is a little different because they have a specific board that has to sign off on that submittal before it comes to the city. So to move it up to December, I think that puts a lot of pressure on the process, especially for the Board of Education, to have the necessary time to go through their budget, review it with their board, gain approval, and then submit it to the city.
And this is Carl Dickens, along with what you're saying, Greg, that they also need time for a public hearing, right?
They incorporate an opportunity. I can't say if they have a public hearing. For example, the Board of Ed approved their budget submittal this past yesterday. I don't believe they held a public hearing. I don't know if that's part of their procedure.
When does a public hearing occur, or does it?
You're talking in terms of
For the Board of Education's budget.
I'm currently not aware of when they hold a public hearing.
Isn't it held by the Board of Estimate and Taxation?
The Board of Estimate and Taxation, as well as the Finance Committee of the Common Council, we hold
Hearings.
public hearings on the overall budget, whereby any member of the community can comment on any portion of the budget, which includes the Board of Education's budget.
Okay, yeah, because I remember attending some meetings last year where their request was cut back by council by about $5 million or something like that. They put a request in. You guys all had your meetings and talking, and then there was a meeting and public could attend, maybe as a council meeting, I'm not sure, but you reduced their request by 5 million.
Okay, so you're, Greg, you're suggesting that we stay with January.
That Greg Burnett, that would be my suggestion, unless we have an opportunity to circle back with Mr. Dakowitz to understand why he's requesting a December date. But I think that's putting more pressure on the overall process, especially for the Board of Education, to be prepared to submit a formal budget request to the city in early December.
I think as we go through this, we'll probably have several items that we want to discuss with him ourselves. So that would be a good one to start with. I think that's a good idea.
I can say this, and I'm not going to quibble about dates. That's really up to you all to figure out what works and what the history and customs have been in the community. But the thinking was this. I had a long conversation. I brought this up at the last meeting, and that is that boards of education, and I didn't know they didn't do a public hearing, which is kind of interesting because it's only the Board of Education that gets to control their lines. And so by the time it comes to the BET or the council, and the council just controls a cap, overall cap, the concept of a public hearing on the line items in the budget, the Board of Education budget, is nice, but neither the Board of Estimate or the council or the mayor can alter those lines in the budget. They can only alter the bottom line in the budget. And so the concept is, whether December 15th, January 1st, January 15th, whatever the date is, was this. Boards of education argue that they are different, and they are. They do have very strict statutory responsibilities, but they're a department of the city. And in most of the charters in the state, they have to operate as a department of the city and provide all the information that every other department has to provide. There's no restriction on that. Even if you don't control, for example, the payroll roster of the Board of Education, if the CFO, as he would like us to put in here, wants to have a provision that requires all departments to lay out the payroll roster, the head count of a department by title and function and actual dollars, even though we can't do anything about that on the general side. That's information they have to comply with. All the information regarding their proposed expenditures, the revenues, all those things, they have to comply with. Every procedural requirement any department has to comply with has to be complied with by the Board of Ed. And so you'll see in a moment, there's a section on education that I'm recommending that we delete, that we incorporate in this section to make sure all the elements of what the charter is trying to get from the Department of Education are laid out, but they're no different than any other department. If, as the president indicates, that there is a need for additional time, that's a different argument. But in terms of the information that's requested, they are just like any other department. And I think that's the principle that we're trying to establish in this section, which is actually a section that's in the charter right now. We're adding a couple of new elements to it in terms of content of the budget. So that was the thinking. And Henry, I'm sure Henry would be happy to come before and answer the question and work out the actual dates and how those dates will work.
I think we also need to make sure that whether the Board of Ed has a public hearing or not. I don't think it's clear, so we could check that out before our next meeting. I'm not aware of it, but I just think we need to double check.
Neither.
We are accurate in our interpretation of how it works. Okay, so we can move on then.
So, thank you, Madam Chair, Steve Mednick. There are right now 3 elements. We're going to add a 4th.
Excuse me, Madam Chair, if I could, just before we
Yeah,
move on
Tom.
too far. This is Tom Livingston. Just, I note that, and this is a nit, but I think it's important we just cover it. In subsection A, you refer specifically to the Board of Education, and B, you don't. I think it's important that we somehow, that we make it clear that it does cover the Board of Education, whether we have a defined term at the outset or we put it in this section, so there's no question going forward.
Each department head, including the Board of Education.
Yeah, I just think that would help. Thank you.
We should be consistent with that, the
Yeah.
department heads and boards and commissions also along with the Board of Ed. Right?
Yeah, or maybe a defined term, whatever way you want to do it, just treat them the same.
Yeah, no, I'm pretty diligent on making sure they're included here. Board of Education and the department they're under. Okay,
Okay, good catch. Thank you.
excellent. Thank you, Tom.
Okay, so now we're on
Yeah.
2.
Yeah, 1, 2, well, yeah, we're on the elements under B,
Yeah,
which starts with itemization. We were going to add an extra clause in there regarding head counts by title and function and dollars. But Henry had asked that why don't we just create that as a separate element? So one of the things that Henry would like to see in the charter is a requirement that each of the department budgets need to lay out the payroll roster, I think, as opposed to headcount. Well, I'll come up with a proper term as opposed to a colloquial term, and titles or functions and actual budget items, and that the budget proposal should have an itemization of proposed expenditures for services or administration to be required, including personnel and monetary requirements. There are comparative data. And he asked me to add a provision, a parenthetical, unless otherwise provided by the CFO or designee. He believes that he already provides the comparative data that's actually generated by his department. I told him that I would not recommend taking this out because I want to make sure that everybody understands that this is something that's essential. So if he is saying to the departments, I've got that data, you don't need to provide it to me, that's fine. Everything's been complied with. And so that information would then be included as well. And the last provision I talked about a few moments ago, and that is performance measures, service levels, differentiation of services. this is more additional information and the POCD objectives. Henry thought, I'm trying to reflect, I want to try to give you everything he said to me today. If I have pretty good notes on my meeting with him. Henry thought that the POCD only applied to the capital side. I think it applies to non-capital as well. And that's why I've included it in this proposed language. That's it. That's it.
Any comments on that? I want to go back to B2. The last sentence says that they report it's based on the actual income other than income from tax revenues and expenditures for the preceding fiscal year. So I don't know if that's clear, because as we go through this, we're in a fiscal year. So are we talking about 18 months back or 6 months back, or the current year? I don't think it's clear. Especially if you're moving this up to October and moving dates. You know, do you see where I mean? Yeah.
Yeah, I see it. Yeah.
Would the preceding fiscal year just be July 1st to June 30th
Of what year?
of the year before the one you're in at that time?
It would have to be the
That's my
prior,
point.
it would have to be a prior complete fiscal year in order to get,
So we need just something to make that clear.
all right,
I mean, that's pretty much how everything else works, I think. In the city.
yeah,
Just recently completed.
Yeah.
I'm happy to throw a little clause in there of the preceding fiscal year.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? So we're now on C, Board of Education.
So this section, and I'll defer to the two council members and anybody else who has vast experience in the city. I believe what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to look at this section to see those items that are appropriately collectible by the city and make sure they go into the generic department requirements, because the Board of Ed is no different than any other department. There had to be a time when this special act was adopted where maybe it was before collective bargaining, where the city fathers and mothers had authority over salaries at the Board of Education. The BET doesn't control salaries. The mayor doesn't control salaries. The council doesn't control salaries. They're collectively bargained for the most part. The superintendent's salary is approved by the Board of Education and no one else by statute. And so you have no authority over the board, the superintendent's salary. And so most of this language is really not germane. And I'll talk to the Corporation Council as well. And my general recommendation is to pull language out of here if there's any language that is useful and put it into 10-2B so that it applies to all departments. Whatever other departments are required to provide, the Board of Ed is required to provide. But I think these special provisions really don't apply in 2022 or 2023.
So you could just add including the Board of Education.
Yeah, well, they're going to be,
Previous.
that's already going to go in there, but I'm going to say, I'm going to look through this one more time,
Okay,
see if there's any element that is legally appropriate and put that into that section as well. And then just delete subsection C.
would you, do you intend to articulate the fact of how salaries are established through arbitration?
No,
No.
no, that's state law governs that.
Oh, well, I just meant referring to state law.
It's good. You know, I didn't put this in your proposal, but one of the things that I have been putting into proposals is, and I'm glad that that Greg is here, the president chair, wears many hats on the council. I've been putting provisions in charters. One of the controversial areas in budgets is overtime, particularly in certain departments. I won't refer to the departments in general, but there's two particular departments that have significant overtime functions that are based on minimum personnel requirements and other of those types of elements. And one of the provision, and a lot of people don't understand how overtime is generated. They think that overtime is generated because you have a snowstorm and public works employees have to go out because we had a really bad winter. Well, that could be. But a lot of collective bargaining agreements have provisions in them that trigger overtime that are based on scheduling, that are based on sicknesses, illnesses in a department. Most cities are getting away from overtime going into retirement functions, but a lot of overtime was generated because senior members of departments would work a lot of hours in their last 3 years. Again, nothing to do with services. So I have developed some language if there's an interest that requires the departments to lay out in their overtime requests in their budgets how that overtime is generated and what their estimates are based upon, if they're based upon contractual provisions. So I just wanted to raise that. If I didn't put that in, it would be presumptuous on my part, but I wanted to raise it with you as a provision that I've been recommending. So I don't know if there's any thought on that.
So this is Carl Dickens. Would that not be subject to collective bargaining agreements? Something along that line?
It's not subject to it. It is a collective bargaining agreement.
But that's what I mean. So
Yeah.
the overtime is dictated. What is paid or overtime is already managed by the collective bargaining agreement.
Yeah, and the theory is this. I served on a board of alders for 10 years in New Haven. It took me a few terms to figure out that that was the case. It took me a few years to figure out that collective bargaining agreements trump local law. So that if you have for example, a disciplinary procedure in your charter to deal with police or fire or any department, public works employees, et cetera, and the collective bargaining agreement creates a new disciplinary procedure and eliminates the police commission or the fire commission or a public works commission from being the disciplinary tribunal, that trumps your charter. No matter what is in your charter, that collective bargaining agreement trumps it.
Yeah.
And so a lot of council members don't know or don't realize or don't pay attention to the fact that overtime, they get overtime budgets every year. Why are these overtime budgets what they are? It's in the collective bargaining agreement. And if they see it over the course of time, they may influence a mayor who's the chief negotiator for a community to sit down and say, we got to fix this. We can't go on. This is unsustainable. And we have no control over it because once we approve the collective bargaining agreement, we're locked in. And so that's the reason it's become kind of a disclosure provision so that members of councils, alders have a better sense of what is driving those types of provisions in contracts so they can bring, and mayors too, can understand what the problems are, what's driving the problem, and to see whether they could remedy it at the next collective bargaining session.
Yeah, so in theory, you're saying you could actually negotiate that out if you wanted
Yeah,
to.
that's Carl talking.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So this is Carl Still Dickens. I just want to clarify a point that is sort of related to this and what we're talking about. You made a statement that all the other departments have a department head that they report to, and you referred to the Board of Education as a department also. Who's the board report to?
Well, the board doesn't report to anybody. The department reports to the board. That's why I include the Board of Education in as a factor. So they're different in the sense that they have an elected board that has responsibilities for the management of that department.
Okay. So the ultimate department head is the board.
Ultimately, the superintendent responds to the board by statute.
Okay.
Does not respond to the mayor or anybody else.
Okay.
And I mentioned referencing the arbitration in this area because I don't think most of the public understands the salaries and how they're set. They don't understand it's really through the arbitration. So if we're trying to clarify it and have people understand how our city works, it might be helpful to just reference that. Any comments on that?
No, I think that's a good idea.
No, it's a great idea.
Okay.
I have language that I've been using in other charters on
Yeah.
that. So, yeah, all right.
Okay. Okay,
This is Greg Burnett.
Right.
Steve, I would say, and you might want to circle back with Mr. Dakowitz, but the departments, especially those that do have, I'll say the larger overtime line items, there is a extensive discussion
Mm,
in terms of those line items. So it's not as if that is a topic that is not
yeah,
reviewed in great detail
every
here
year,
in Norwalk.
right,
So adding the verbiage about overtime, I don't think there should be any hesitation because we're already doing that.
great point. Any other discussion there?
So do you want to add it or do you think it's unnecessary to add it? That's,
Well, that's kind of my point. Yeah, I mean, we are already covering the overtime line items in great detail during each and every budget discussion. So, what would be the driver to add it to as an, you know, in this article?
if culturally, if historically in your city, this is part of your process, then you don't need to make it a constitutional standard. If it's already a custom in practice, and everybody understands that these provisions are driven by contract provisions as opposed to service need, then that's fine. I mean, all the communities, when I served in your position, we all went over the overtime budgets, but I'm going to tell you something. I'd say 80% of my colleagues didn't understand that that these provisions were driven by contract. Most of them understood that there was a crime wave or that there were a lot of fires. Well, there are not a lot of fires. Most cities don't have many fires at all. And didn't understand that they were being driven by minimum personnel requirements and contracts that really lead to the overtime as opposed to the services that are being provided to the public. So if that's already a standard that you guys that you already applied day to day, you don't need it in your charter. I just thought I'd raise it, but it's a good point, Mr. President.
Well, I was talking in general about the salaries, not the overtime aspect.
That's different. I understand that.
Okay, Greg, are you okay with that? Or do you want further discussion?
Greg Burnett, my recommendation is to circle back to the chief financial officer to ensure there's a my level of comfort is at the same level as Mr. Dakowitz. I think it will be, but if he feels it's necessary to have verbiage in there about the overtime aspect line item, then I'm okay with it either way. But I think as a practice, we have been consistent in terms of ensuring we get full detail as it relates to any overtime line item.
And I did not bring this up with Henry because you're my client. He's not. I wanted to raise it with the commission before I raised it with Henry. So I'll be happy to follow up on that, Mr. President.
Steve, were you going to forward his comments to us, Henry's comments to us or not?
What I'm going to do is when I do my revision, you will see the changes I've made as a result of my conversations with him. I took notes. They're on my sheet, but I was going to do after this meeting based on Henry's comments, your comments, I'm going to do another revision because
Okay.
I want more comments. I want the president to look at it. I want Councilman Livingston to look at it. I want the mayor to look at it, other people to look at this provision. This is one of the most important sections of this document.
Okay.
And so you were making a great start here, but I just want to make sure everybody really looks at it and understands it before you give it a final approval. I'm still hoping you'll be able to approve it sometime in January. So my objective will be to have a turnaround for your next meeting.
Okay, so we can move on now to D?
Yeah, D is on the basis of my conversation with Henry. Henry thinks that D is very close to 10-2B. It's the same date, right? Same date. And so I'm going to try to combine D and B. There's a holdover dangling clause in there then to the Board of Estimate, which gets dealt with in the next section. So again, we'll take the taxing district out, but I'm going to see if I can consolidate that with another section to start narrowing down language.
Okay.
So that will probably go away. You'll see that in the red line.
Okay.
All right. E, Madam Chair, is the first reference to the capital budget. The way I developed this is I tried to put all the early procedures of submission in one place. You'll see the next section we're going to go to is the actual general fund budget and how that process works. This section needs to be reworked. This is driven by the current language from the Code of Ordinances. What I did, Tom picked up on this, is I took your ordinance dealing with capital and moved it into the charter because I think the charter really needs to establish the capital budget process. It should be a constitutional process. This language, and maybe the president and Councilman Livingston could help with it, is it's currently set up that the common council and the head of each department submits to the Planning and Zoning Commission and the controller, and I believe it should be the CFO, not the controller at this point, a detailed estimate of their capital budget, which in the estimate of the common council, et cetera, et cetera. Henry says that's not the way this process begins. And so I don't know if he believes that the estimates come to the CFO at this stage in the process. And I don't know if anybody could help me with that, that the submission should go to the CFO and he would do it by December 31st as opposed to the first day of January. Who's going to quibble over that? But can you correct the record here? Does the council and the departments submit to the Planning and Zoning Commission an estimate of the capital budget at the earliest stage? Language didn't make sense to me, but
No, this is Tom Livingston, and Greg can weigh in on this as well, because he's more familiar with it as finance chair, but no, we don't.
all right. So Henry's notion that it goes to the CFO, it's similar to the budget. This is in the same way that departments bring the initial budget items to the CFO, they would be bringing the capital budgets items to the CFO and the P&Z Commission. Right?
That's correct.
All right, good. I'll fix that.
On the structure of the budget, would it be better to separate the operating budget in one area and then go to the capital as a second section rather than have them intermingled?
They're not intermingled except for this one provision. This is the submission portion.
All right.
So
Then this could be pulled out and put into the capital budget process.
could be.
Well, to me, it would be more logical.
Well, these are preliminary provisions, so whatever you want. I just thought if you put all the preliminary submissions in one section, everybody knows that in these days in December and January, you're doing these things. Then we move on to the full general fund process, end it, and then you'll see that we go to the capital process. So whatever you like, if you want to move this one, dangling this one section to that, that's.
Well, we address them in a public way separately, correct? Greg and Tom? The two budgets
Yeah.
hearings are separate.
Yeah.
This is Tom,
Yeah.
yes.
Yes, and so that's why I bring that point up.
And that's why they're separate in the draft.
Yeah,
Except for
but
the
this piece is not. It follows in line with the operating budget. This
Your call, whatever you want to do.
This is Tom again. I understand what the chair is saying because I was looking at this first and I think it gets a little confusing, particularly when you see this section C was in there and then D.
Yeah,
If those two come out, it might read better because then it's all about the estimates. But I totally understand your point because
Yeah.
they do get a little mingled and
All right,
lost.
I'll move it to the capital budget section.
any other comments on that? Okay,
And then you'll see the first of the definitions. Henry and I talked about the definition of capital budget items. He wanted me to put some language in here pertaining to that a capital budget item is something in excess of $5,000. He wanted to have some kind of floor for it. And I recommended a parenthetical or as otherwise modified by ordinance so that if the council wants to increase the floor for it, they can do so. This $5,000 may work in 2022, but in 2042, you may want to raise that floor if we don't have a charter revision. This gives the council the ability by ordinance to modify that. And it's currently more than 1 year. And again, if by ordinance they want to change that, they should be able to change that as well. And then he wanted to change the definition of program of capital expenditures and call it the 5-year program of capital expenditures, because that's what you in effect do. So those are the changes. Those definitions will not be in the body of the budget document. They will be in chapter 1 or 2, article 1 or 2, which will have all the definitions for the charter. And so they will be capitalized terms in this section, and they will be defined in one place earlier in the document.
So this is Carl Dickens. I have a question. Under the current system, and even in the future, if the capital budget, once it's passed, something comes up and it needs to be increased, does that go before council? Greg, do you and your committees then handle that to say and take a vote on it and say yea or nay, we can increase the capital budget? Or because in here, it doesn't appear to me, and maybe I'm just reading it wrong, that there's no ultimate authority to say, yes, it can get increased, but by who?
Greg Burnett speaking. If there is a need to increase an approved capital budget line item,
Mhm.
it would go before the Board of Estimate and Taxation. It could be addressed through a special capital budget appropriation, whereby it would go through the BET, it would go through the Finance and Claims Committee, and then ultimately to the council for final approval.
Okay.
that's sort of spelled out, I think, clearly later on. We have low battery.
Probably is.
So should we just say that the amount would be set by the ordinance, without any amount in it now?
I don't have an
This-
opinion on that. I mean,
this
having
is-
an amount, having some amount established,
Yes.
as long as you have a safety measure to be able to increase it, it probably makes some sense because you don't want to have a situation where the amount isn't established.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is Tom Livingston, if I might add to that. One concern I have is when we start pulling all these items out to put them in ordinances, we'll have a lot to do.
Yeah,
And if we can minimize, if this one doesn't have to be done, that might make it easier, as long as we have the ability to do it at some point.
okay.
Yeah, I don't like putting numbers in the charter as a rule, but when he brought it up with me, I thought it made sense to have some kind of threshold, and as long as you have the prophylactic for the council, I think that you're in pretty good shape.
Okay,
All right,
okay, so where are you now exactly?
so we're gonna start with the general fund budget.
10-4.
Yeah, it actually is 10-3. This is where I made my mistake in my section number. So, but who's quibbling? So on this, not a lot of change. The yellow sections, we're going to add on or before the second Monday of the month. Oh, he also wants to make clear that this submission is by the mayor and the CFO. Now he brought up, and I wanted to disclose this as well, that, and maybe Tom, or I don't know if Greg was there or whether other commissioners were there, that it has been brought up by the mayor's office that should this not be the mayor's submission as opposed to the CFO's submission? And so I wanted to remind everybody that that is something that was on the table. In most communities, I didn't get into this discussion with Henry today, but it's a public discussion, so he'll know I'm talking about it this evening. In most communities, it's the mayor's budget. The CFO presents
To the.
the data
and
to the
works-
mayor.
And works for the mayor.
Yeah, and works for the mayor. So it's a mayor's budget. You have a slightly different procedure than a lot of other municipalities. But the fact is, the mayor is the chief executive officer. This is an important executive function. So you have to decide, whose budget is this? When the budget goes to the Board of Estimate, is it the mayor's budget that's going to the Board of Estimate? It's the mayor's proposed budget that's going to the Board of Estimate and the council. That's kind of the way I normally see things. Again, I will defer to culture and custom, but it's not unusual to have something like this called the mayor's budget.
I would, this is Carl Dickens. I would only say that I think the viewpoint of the citizen is that it is already the mayor's budget. That's how they look at it. I think, I could be wrong. So it should probably be clearly defined in here who the ultimate person is. And I agree with you. It's mayor's the CEO, so.
Okay, anybody else have a comment? Okay. I tend to agree that this is a mayor's budget, but I don't know if, so we wouldn't be making any change in this document.
Right,
Well, we would, because right now it's right now it's the CFO
right.
presents the budget to the Board of Estimate, not the mayor. That's in the current charter.
So it is a fair, it's a
He
big change, but not
presents
that big a
it-
deal.
He
but it is.
presents it for the mayor.
Well, it
So-
doesn't say that. Yeah.
Well, but that's what's happened. It's not. So we need to discuss that further, I'm sure.
That's why I raised it. I
Yeah,
just,
okay.
I'm not
Yeah.
saying we should make a change right now, but as of now, he thought you should add the mayor because the mayor's not there. It's the CFO that is there right now. So,
Right,
Okay.
so we would rewrite it that it's the mayor's budget.
Yeah.
Not in those words, but
I will have a note on the side. I won't make the change in the draft. I'll have the note on the side so that there can be further discussion on this topic. Again, in subparagraph B, we need to take the taxing districts out. And again, all right, that's it on 10 in that section. And I'm gonna deal with some language changes here that deal with kind of a neutral language and kind of uniform language dealing with the pronoun issue. So we'll clean some of that up here as well. Any questions on 10
B, yeah,
4?
B, well, whatever it is, B, the last part of the sentence there, again, this is a timing issue. After deducting the amount of the available revenue for said fiscal year, then that year should be specifically defined.
Well, it's the year for the estimate. This is an estimate for the fiscal year. So
Based on what available revenue from the previous year, right? After deducting the amount of the available revenue that's left over for the said fiscal year. Am I reading that wrong?
I'm looking at it.
Pardon?
I'm just looking at it. This is current language.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's for. This is creating your taxes, yeah, it's kind of ancient language. There needs to be a lot of cleanup in this section.
Yeah, it's
which
not
I'll do.
fair. Yeah,
All right, I'll
clarify it.
I'll clarify that. All right. And I'll take out the references to the taxing districts as well.
Okay,
In the next section, if I may, or
yeah, yes, please.
in the next section, he actually didn't have a lot of comments going forward. I hope he read it all. He didn't stop at a certain point, but he and I are going to talk again. In the initial role of the Board of Estimate and Taxation, we will delete the language in A regarding the taxing districts. And he wanted to make sure in B that it's subject to maximum limit on total appropriation set by the council, and wants to make sure it's in accordance with in accordance with law there, and state law, federal law, etc. He just wanted to make sure that if there are any tax IRS standards, he's thinking in the bond area. It wasn't entirely clear what he was looking for, but I have no problem adding language that all of this has to be in accordance with law. Law will be defined. It'll be a capital L law as state, federal, and local law and case law as well, decisions that are made by the courts.
Madam Chair, this is Tom Livingston. If I could
Yes.
just make one note on this section B,
Uh-huh.
and this sort of runs through it. I think if we can take out language like in legal meeting convened and bring this up to date a bit.
Yep.
Might make it easier for people to read. Said board and legal meeting convened is really pretty archaic.
All right.
So I think
Yeah, I'll go through in my next run. I'll try
Yeah.
to do the cleanup. I didn't want to do that until we went through the sections and see how much I had to do, but in the next run, I will try to do plain language.
Okay,
understand.
I mean, yeah, I think that a lot of this language on polls and rateable estates and is really not helpful language for the members of the public,
Mm,
or for me, for that matter.
it's
And-
not.
And this is Angela. Maybe I'll just make the comment now and we can tackle it another day. But like, again, just sort of reviewing, this is just one article. And to me, it still feels very heavy on legalese. And yes, I'm a lawyer, but even then, I think if we're designing this for an average person in Norwalk, maybe what we need to also think about is at the top of each article. So for this one, so what does a budget process look like in very simple language? And then we can have this other language included, but I think it'll be still way too dense. And I think our overall goal was, and I get it, we have to have these provisions, of course we do, but I do wonder whether there's a way that we can sort of meet in the middle and have something, if it's just like at the top of that article explaining exactly what this is said to do in very simple language for folks to understand. I just think we're making edits on a document that's already still very dense. So we don't have to tackle today, but I worry.
I agree with you.
Is that Tom? Who's
Now,
that?
this is Carl Dickens. I agree with what Angela just
Carl,
said.
you gotta tell us who you are. You
I've
keep
spoken
forgetting.
so much now, I would thought that they would know. but I-
No, we don't. Yeah. Okay. Steve, do you want to respond to that?
Oh, I don't disagree at all.
Okay,
And I will do my best to make that happen. It's we have a huge charter to clean up.
Yeah.
And my hope is that we will make it as simple and direct as we can. And so Right now, my objective is to make sure that we have all the component parts in it. And as we're going through it and drafting it, and I'd be happy to have Commissioner Wasuna take a look at it carefully as well and give recommendations.
Yeah,
We will have this document, we'll let it breathe.
yeah.
The objective is by May, hopefully to have it cleaned up as much as we can. It's a daunting task, and we will try to do that.
No, yeah.
Yeah, and the other thing we could do, I mean, I'm a big advocate of this. In some of my charters, some people like it, some people don't. I have explanatory provisions in charters. In some of my charters, I have comments of the 2023 Charter Commission. This section is intended to blah, 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 blah in
Exactly.
simple terms so that there can be clarity. But if we can do it in the body, that's the best way to do it. So
So this is Angela, I completely agree. And again, I'm not trying to diminish all this. This is really important. I'm just saying, you know, for the average person who will not read through each of these provisions, what does the budget process look like? What are we trying to do? And who has the authority to do X? And again, I like what you've suggested, which is maybe at the end, we can look at it again and just include that somewhere at the top where folks can just, in the interest of being, you know, much more modern, just at a glance, understand exactly what this
Yeah.
article is trying to do. That's it.
And I'll tell you, because this is and thank you very much for raising that point. This is a tremendous opportunity because we're trying to clean this up in a very significant way. Most of my charters are around the edges. We're going around the edges in terms of not changing a lot of substantial procedure, but I think this commission has been given very broad mandate to clarify and clean up this document so that it is more readable. So I want to try to do the best I can. As I'm going through these sections, I am looking at the model document that Civic League, I think it's the Civic League puts out. Although I have to tell you, while I think there's a lot of good things in it, it's pretty dense as well. Lawyers tend to write that way, and I will do my best to overcome the afflictions of my profession to keep this as simple as I can make it. And so, I know I take criticism seriously, but I don't take it personally. So let's, you know, I think it's great thoughts, Commissioner. Appreciate it. Thank you. So, notice, and again, notice will, it's not newspaper publication. You'll see the defined terms of meetings and hearing notice, and we will go through this language. I want everybody to look at it. I want the council members to look at it. I'll ask the Corporation Council to look at the definitions of public notice to make sure everybody is comfortable with the standard. The Corp Council is going to have to defend the standard going forward. And again, I want to make sure it's absolutely clear. In the public notice section, I think this is the chair alluded to it earlier. This is the section that talks about postings in the city clerk's office, postings in the library, city websites, other electronic media, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a very broad posting standard. There's no newspaper publication requirement unless you decide there should be somewhere, or if the state mandates it. The state has newspaper publication requirements, and we can't do anything about those, but we can take care of the newspaper publication requirements here. If the council feels that there should be a newspaper requirement, pass an ordinance and say there should be a newspaper publication. But the general standard should be that that's not necessary in the world we're living in today, unless people conclude otherwise, unless your customs are otherwise. I mean, but this gives you flexibility to deal with that.
Okay. Steve, on the library piece, Norwalk has a unusual library system. Two of the libraries are a city department, and two are independent and belong to a taxing district. So we need to generalize the term library somehow, because
I have a city library.
in
you know,
each branch, there's one branch of the city library, and there are two separate district libraries, the 3rd district and the 6th district.
So I would say any libraries in the city.
Yeah, just say in the libraries. But, you know, it's a separate department.
All right, any libraries? Done.
Anybody else want to comment on that?
No, it's a good point, though. I thought a library was a library. I didn't know that.
Well,
Then
yeah,
again, I forget where I live.
not in Norwalk. So two libraries became a city department in 1971, and two other libraries did not want to join and wanted to be independent. So they are supported by the 3rd taxing district and the 6th taxing district.
So just a point, though, that what you're saying, they all get public money now.
They don't get the same amount of money, and the employees in two libraries are city employees. In the other two libraries, they are not.
Interesting.
Yes,
This is Tom Livingston again. Yeah, this is another example of taxing districts. In the 6th taxing district, the taxing district funds the library.
and the 3rd taxing district funds the 3rd taxing district library. And the city of Norwalk funds the one in the center of Norwalk and in South Norwalk. Yes.
So lowercase L libraries fixed,
Okay,
unless there's an objection. The role of the Common Council, we're changing the date. Well, we're recommending a change in the date, and you'll see how it works is immediately, because this language, actually, I broke it off from the sentence it was in before. This is immediately following Tuesday. This is the following Tuesday from when it's submitted to them. We basically say that they have not more than 21 days following transmittal and presentation to the council. The council gets 21 days with the charter, with the budget, which is roughly where they are now. But we're going to try to set the terminology a little differently. So you'll see that change, and we could debate it when the language comes through. B is the current exemption. The initial cap is not subject to the referendum provision. Whether we need to repeat that, it's current language that's in there. C is current language as well. He had no comment on that. I don't know if anybody else does.
before you go on to the next page,
Yeah.
under the 10-7, role of the Common Council.
Yep.
Do we say role of the Board of Estimate, role of Planning and Zoning, role of the mayor?
Well, we don't do planning and zoning because that's in the capital, but we do in the prior sections, initial role of the Board of Estimate and Taxation.
Can
I
you,
can- yeah.
but can we go back to that? It just seems that diminishes the respect for the council.
I don't know what that means.
Well, review by the mayor. So the mayor, review by the mayor. So is it review by the council?
You could say that.
Or should it be a role of the mayor?
Exactly. It should be the same. That's my point. I think, I don't like the word role.
So I want to say review.
Review. Mhm.
Yeah, I agree, Betsy. I
Yeah.
agree.
Yeah, that's. We need to be consistent.
Mhm.
Okay, any comments on that? All right. So A, B, C, are we on C now? 10-7C.
I think so.
I'll be right there. I'm just fixing these other things.
Oh, okay.
So this is Carl again, and just a question while you're doing that. Thought came to me that, so we spent all of our time and put this very important document together. And maybe there's a current, maybe it's in this, maybe it's not, maybe there's a current way of doing it, but who does a periodic, or when should there be a periodic check of everything that goes on within the city that it actually conforms to what the charter says?
Well, you have checks and balances, I guess. You know, they have the council that can check on the mayor, whether the mayor's performing in accordance with the charter. The mayor or the corporation council can certainly indicate that the Planning and Zoning Commission or the Board of Education or the mayor are not complying with charter provisions, but I'm not sure.
No, I hear you. Theoretically, that should happen.
Yeah,
Is that addressed in the code of ethics?
It is?
I don't know.
I said, is it addressed?
Oh, I don't know. I
Is
mean,
that-
just like theoretically at the national level, it's supposed to be the same thing in the federal government. But everything is political anymore, as we all know. And I don't mean this as a dispersion on anything, but I mean, this town is unique in that all voices are not heard. So therefore, who looks out for all voices to see that what is being done within the city is conforming to this document, which it's the first time and it's been revised in 100 years.
Well, that's not accurate. It has been revised.
Well, in
And to
2016,
last-
there was a
right,
one,
that
yeah,
was-
yeah,
Right, yeah. It was written 100 years ago.
right. With some revisions from then, yes.
Up.
Right.
I've
Stand
not,
corrected.
the closest thing I've come to having an entity that has some teeth with regard to the fiscal side of compliance with charter provisions and other related laws is the Financial Audit Review Commission in Waterbury, the FARC, they called it. And as opposed to the farce, but it was called the FARC. And they did that because Waterbury, at the time we did the charter in 2002, was coming out of extreme financial distress, is the kindest way to phrase it.
Yeah.
And that's been very effective in Waterbury. And they're an entity appointed by the mayor and approved by the Board of Aldermen in their town. Their budget cannot be reduced so that they can play a significant role. We've created in Hamden a finance commission, not a board of finance, but a finance commission that's an oversight body where the mayor gets 2 appointments and the council gets 3 appointments, and they play a role where they have an oversight function, a review function during the budget season, and an oversight function throughout the remainder of the year to look at long-term issues and compliance issues and the validity of data and things like that. They don't have a staff, so it's not as strong as the FARC in Waterbury with their audit function. But I can't think of any other entities that so those are 2 entities that play somewhat of an oversight role, but I think the theory of most charters is you have representative democracy, and you have a chief executive that's elected, and you have council members that are elected, Board of Education elected, others that are elected, Board of Estimate not, that should be holding everybody accountable in a check and balance situation. I'm not sure that always works, Commissioner, but I'm not sure. If you have some thoughts and ideas, I'm certainly willing to look at them, but
Well, I mean, it just seems to be long periods of time before, and I'm not talking about revising the charter or anything. I'm more looking at it from a standpoint that, and I would ask the 2 illustrious council members that we have with us here, is that when there are certain major things take place, do you have a means of where you do a litmus test to see that it's in conformity with what the charter says?
Oh, yeah. But the charter.
This is Tom Livingston. Yeah, if there's ever any question, we will certainly look into that. I mean, talk to the corporation council. if there's any question. Fortunately, there hasn't been in my experience, but to your basic point, I have to say I'm a little concerned about setting up some sort of third party at this point, given the task in front of this commission right now.
No, I
think
agree.
that could-
I agree with that. I'm
Yeah.
not even, I'm not
I
even
mean, that would take an awful
asking
lot
for
of time. I
that.
mean, yeah. I mean, it may
Um,
be something you want to put on your list of things to think about at the end, but
Yeah,
I also think that when we get through this section, you'll see that there are checks and balances on the budgetary things, the reporting system. And necessary approvals for any changes in the budget. And then review of any excess money left over from any project and how that's handled. It's pretty laid out. So I think you might have your question answered by the time we get through this, and you'll feel more comfortable with how we do it.
This is Greg Burnett.
Okay.
I will say that, from my memory, definitely when we prepare the budget calendar, there is, direct checks and balances to ensure the calendar is created according to the charter.
okay.
And you can actually see commentary, as we've already shared, in the budget calendar where there's referral to certain actions taking place on certain dates per the charter. So that is one area where the work is being guided by the charter. But to your broader question, is there a checks and balances as it relates to everything we do? And the referral back to the charter, I can't say that action takes place.
No, I understand.
Okay, let's get back to this, the money flow here, so we can try to move it forward. Okay, so we're now at 10:08.
Yeah, and I'll revise the title to further review and deliberations by the Board of Estimate and Taxation. And we talked about adding to this section, again, we're going to do a not later than 21 days where they get 21 days after the council sets the cap. And we want to make it clear in this section, because it's not in this section, that they are required to hold a public hearing during that period of time, because there is no, my understanding is that the Board of Estimate does hold a public hearing, but it's not mandated here. And Henry thought that when Henry said that to me, I thought maybe we should include a public hearing requirement in here so that it very clearly is stated.
Well, we certainly historically have done it always.
Yeah.
So that's,
It says they'll hear the parties who may desire to be heard and all that, but it should be, again, that's to Commissioner Wazuna's point, that's really, it's a very long sentence. So I'll clean that language up for the next meeting. And then we go to the final the transmittal to the council. And I did add language in the B portion. Again, there's in the B portion to this, and I'll defer to the two council members. If they don't raise the cap if they don't go beyond the cap, if they don't propose a budget beyond the cap, does this come into play at all? Do they have to transmit back to the council? Is that necessary if they don't do it, or does the transmittal, is the action simply, we have nothing to do because they didn't? How does that work?
This is Greg Burnett. There is a transmittal letter from the chairman of the Board of Estimate and Taxation back to the council outlining any changes that the BET may be suggesting without having an impact on the bottom line number. So there is detail if there is movement of funding from one line item to another. And they lay out that detail, which the council reviews.
But the council can't do anything about it unless it exceeds the cap.
Right. The main action of the council comes into play if there's a request to increase the cap.
All right.
If there's no request to increase the cap, then there's essentially no action needed on the part of the council.
So is the addition of the term "if necessary" in subpart B useful in that regard, just to clarify that?
Mhm. It says if necessary.
No, I added
You've
that
taken
language.
it
That's not
out.
that's not in the current charter. I added that language.
Oh, you
sorry.
added the word necessary?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm sorry, which section are you at?
It's in 10.
B,
Yeah, it's in subsection B under transmittal of board of estimate and taxation should be said.
This is Tom Livingston. I mean, I don't have a problem either way with it, 'cause I think the may suggests that they could have, they don't have to have the meeting, but I'm fine with it either way.
All right.
And I'll defer to Greg. I don't think it hurts.
No.
to have it?
Yeah.
Yeah. okay.
Yeah.
Greg?
Greg Burnett, yeah, I can go either way, but the more information in a clear and easy manner
Yeah.
would be best.
Okay.
I should say easy to understand.
Well, the necessary, then you get into the discussion of what is necessary and what isn't necessary. So if it's not there, you don't have to have that discussion. They have the ability to do it if they want to do it.
Well, necessary would go to only one thing. Is the cap has the cap been exceeded? We could say if the cap has been exceeded, but if necessary refers to the cap, that's the only function that they would have. So
Benita, may just suffice?
Yes, that's, I think it's clearer with just may.
but it says may have a
Amend.
meaning to amend the maximum limit of total appropriations.
Yeah,
Do they have that ability if the Board of Estimate has not exceeded it? It's not necessary to do it if they haven't exceeded it. That's why the clause was put in there. Because by saying may, they have the discretion to amend it. For what purpose? Because it doesn't say anything about it at all, that's their only function. We should make it clear that the only thing they can do is amend it if the Board of Estimate has exceeded the cap.
Steve, it's Tom Livingston again.
Yeah,
Is that what it says, though? I mean, I may not be what we're doing, but I don't think
yeah,
the language seems to give the council the
Power
ability
to change it.
to amend it. And regardless of what the BET does.
So you can do that.
Yeah, that's what it says. So that's the way I read the language.
Yeah, no, it's pretty broad language.
Yeah, and I'm not sure I want to change that.
Then leave it.
Yeah, the Greg Burnett, I think leaving the may provides the common council with the flexibility. For example, when we get this far into the budget cycle, even after the BET has gone through their due diligence, there could be additional revenue information we receive from the state.
or the Fed.
Right, or the federal government that could have an impact on our final budget. So allowing the allowing the council the flexibility to be agile to make any last minute final change to that cap based upon any late breaking financial information is a good thing to have. You know, the council should not be locked in that once the BT finish, we're done and we can't do anything.
So are you saying that if this new money came in after the BET has sent in back the budget with the cap, within the limits of the cap, but new money has come in, you have the ability to then amend the budget, increasing the cap?
Or
And-
decreasing it, depending if we receive additional funding from the federal government. So that means there would be less impact on the tax rates because we received additional funding.
So you have outside sources that would reduce the reliance on the local property tax, and there's no line item change in that case. But what if you have increased funding and you want to add some spending?
Well, we have that, Greg Burnett, we have that flexibility to do that as well.
So you can add to a line in the budget under this provision?
There might be an entity where the council as well as the BET might have agreed on a reduction, and with this new influx of revenue, might be able to reinstate the initial budget requests.
All right. The reason I added that language is because when you go to the next section, it goes back to the Board of Estimate and Taxation to make alterations in appropriations and tax rates necessary to comply with the limit set by the council. So I guess what you're saying then is that in that circumstance where new revenues came in after the BET sent it over to you, you could actually raise the cap or lower the cap, however you want to do it, and they would have to make the adjustment afterward. All right, that's fine. I'll take that language out.
Okay, so all of this section that we're talking about now, is this the operating budget only, or is this the operating and capital budget combined?
We get to the capital budget in a few pages.
Okay, so that there again, you know, having the two broken down clearly, I think will be important. You know, what I brought it up before, where we had the capital budget mixed in with the operating.
What do you, all right, I'm not sure,
That's-
because this is all operating. We haven't talked about capital.
Well, we did in one section when
No,
I asked you to
and we
move.
agree that we're
yeah.
gonna move that.
Right, okay.
All right. It's not. If there's something you think I can do to clarify that this is the operating budget, we're still in the operating budget provisions, I'm happy to do it.
Yeah. I just wanted to make it clear that we were in the operating budget.
What should is there specific language you'd recommend? Because the section is called operating budget, and that's where we are. We haven't moved to the capital budget. That's what I'm trying to,
Okay, now we're fine.
all right. There are no further changes that were recommended in the operating budget's provisions by Henry. But I'd ask everybody to look at these sections, and I've asked him to take a look at these sections as well, regarding the in 1012 limitations on revenues and expenditures. These are kind of post-budget kind of operating budget provisions, special appropriations. They're repeated. There's some repetition. I will clean that up a little bit, but I wanted people to look at it to make sure that everybody is comfortable with the language that is currently there, and that's the procedure that you follow. So I'll take another look at those sections that are that are there as well. And I guess this is the closest it comes to transfers. How do you deal with transfers in Norwalk? Budget transfers during the course of the fiscal year.
Greg, you-
Greg, yes, Greg Burnett. That falls under the function of the Board of Estimate Taxation. So the Board of Estimate Taxation, they hold monthly meetings. And if there is a transfer request, that department will bring that forward to the BET. And the BET will deliberate the movement of that appropriation from one line item to the next.
All right, I'll
And
look at
that
that
does
language.
not-
Yeah,
That does, those transfers do not come to the Finance and Claims Committee of the Common Council or the full council for approval. Those transfers take place at the BET level.
and those are not dealt with in this section. Those are really dealt with when we get to the Board of Finance, I assume.
the Board of Estimate.
The Board of Estimate.
Board of Estimate and Taxation.
All right, so I'll take a look at that because that's usually in the budget section, and I'll take a look at the transfer language. Okay,
That doesn't happen very often, does it, Greg?
What?
An operating budget.
Transfers?
Yes,
Yeah, no, it happens very often.
every month.
Every month it happens.
Yeah.
Right.
okay, I didn't know
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay,
Can I?
sure,
So-
absolutely. We have a question here.
Question, 10-9C. I just don't understand it's been in here before, the application of 1-669 of this charter.
The exemption for the
Yeah.
referendum.
Yeah, so you have a referendum at the end of the budget process, and this is repeated throughout, whether or not it needs to be is another question. I just kind of kept the historic provision in here. It's saying that these preliminary actions are not subject to referendum. It's only the final action by the Board of Estimate that is subject to referendum. That's why you see it repeated throughout the document, throughout the section. I can probably do a catch-all paragraph at the beginning to eliminate the redundancy. I didn't want to take it out at this stage, but I'll be happy to eliminate the redundancy and make that clear.
I think that's a great idea. I had that noted too and missed it. All right, so 10-11. Appropriations shall not exceed estimate of revenues.
And that's pretty standard language. It's taken from your current charter. There was no, Henry didn't have any proposed changes on that.
Any comments? Seeing none, we can move on to 10-12.
The same is true here. I think I will clean this up a little bit because special appropriations is used in two different places. I just want to make sure that's cleaned up a little bit, but again, no changes recommended by the CFO.
Anybody have any comments on A and B?
Madam Chair.
Yes.
I mean, should all of the CFO references have that note that it didn't, under section where it's CFO or whatever it was comparable?
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, or equivalent, CFO or equivalent official. Should we use that for any reference to that position, just in the event that the position wasn't called out?
Yeah, I usually put a provision in the department head section that where a department head is specifically delineated, it would be an equivalent official. Let's make sure that we hold on to that concept and don't lose it.
Okay.
As a rule, other than naming the mayor, the council, the BET, the Board of Education, I don't like naming subsidiary officers to do things except in their domain. within the finance department or whatever they call it, the OMB. It's tricky because the mayor should have flexibility to make changes in titles and make changes in organizational changes as well. And one of the things I will recommend when we get to the department section is that we have language that allows the mayor and the council to change the names of entities in the charter, as long as they don't eliminate the functions that the charter provides. So that if you have a police department function, you can't eliminate the function. You can call it something else, but you can't eliminate the function. And I think that's important, because if you go another 20 years or 10 years or 5 years, whatever it may be, without a charter revision, you still have a Department of Welfare in your charter. That doesn't exist anymore. So it's, it's important to have that flexibility. So when we get to the department sections, we'll try to make that change.
Okay, so we're going on to the capital budget
Yes.
process.
I would ask that if the council members could really go through this section. I made virtually no changes in this section. Henry didn't have, he's promised to take a closer look at it. A couple of the observations I came up with as we went through this, and I will throw at the beginning of the section, the section that the chair raised earlier, that I'll move the estimate section into this section as well. And to make it clear that that's where the process begins on the capital budget. I've asked Henry to check the dates again that are here. And, again, he had no other comments in here, and I don't know if anybody's read it and has any questions, but I did not make any changes. I think one of the things I would say, and I will raise this with the council members being here, is I think that there was specific reference to a committee of the council in the ordinance. And I might have taken it out to make it clear. What I want to say is that the functions are council functions. If the council decides to designate a committee, either by rule or by ordinance, that's fine. But I think the charter shouldn't lock in a specific committee to have a function. That's the only thing I would.
Right, and this is Tom Livingston, and I agree with that.
Yeah. But they can do it by ordinance, because you could change an ordinance, or you can do it by rule. So, and then the other thing, there's reference to a master plan. Do you still do a master plan, or you just do the plan of conservation?
Yeah, this is Tom Livingston again. That's the POCD.
All right. And I may use Commissioner Fairborn's language or equivalent program, because who knows? Because in the old world, master plan was the term. So we'll do that as well. So I don't have any pithy observations, but I think that I would like to ask the council, because the council does play a role in this, to go through this section, and maybe I'd be happy to talk to Greg and Tom offline and get their thoughts on it. And Henry's going to give me more thoughts, and I could bring back recommendations for changes. And if any commissioners have any thoughts right now, let's go through it.
Okay, I just had some questions on section 1017B. This process, I wasn't sure that we really do this now, and I wanted clarification on that.
This is Tom again. That language was put into an amendment to the ordinance last year.
Okay,
So yes, it is what we do.
so we do it now, but it wasn't historically done, was it?
No,
Yeah, I didn't think so. Okay, so that was my question on that. And then there is a comment about 400,000 in excess of on section 1023B. I don't know if we want to discuss that.
Well, excuse me, Madam Chair, this is Tom Livingston, and I had a question on this whole section. This was taken out of an ordinance that we use in terms of for the building projects in the city.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
We picked $400,000 in the ordinance. And I just guess the question for Steve is to talk about the rationale for taking this out of the ordinance and putting it into the charter. I'm curious what your thinking was on that.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be. What we could do in the charter is simply say that there shall be a council oversight function on capital budget administration. I was really very impressed with the role that the council plays in that way. And so the only rationale for putting it in here, Tom, would be to constitutionalize it, because it's a very unique and interesting role for a council to play.
Yeah.
So that would be the only reason to do it. The other simple way to do it would be to give that responsibility to the council, and they can implement it by ordinance, and you currently have an ordinance. That would be the other way to address it.
So this is Tom again. That would be my preference. One of the reasons this has the detail in it is because it needs to comply with the state school building requirements. So we
Okay.
become, the land use committee becomes the building advisory committee for purposes of the state rules, or the school building committee, C and D. And that's what we, that's one of the reasons we have it so detailed. I don't, my personal
Is
preference
that
is
the
not. to put-
400,000 also, Tom?
No, that was determined just based upon past practice. That's so that doesn't have anything to do with state. This is really
Okay.
what, in this case, Alan Lowe thought he can handle.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm
All
happy. I'm happy to make that change. And this is the reference where the committee is referenced. You're saying
Yeah.
the state law references a specific committee of the council to do that, or is it?
Not of the council of this, we need to have a building advisory committee for the school building projects that go through the Office of School Construction and Grants.
Got it.
And
But-
that's what,
But your ordinance created it as a council function with a council committee.
right, because we used to have a facilities construction commission. And we got rid of it because it was very duplicative of the work the land use committee was doing, and we took those duties and built them into that ordinance.
So I can make a very simple change here and basically say that the council shall establish an ordinance pertaining to the oversight and implementation of city capital building projects in accordance with state law.
Yeah.
In accordance with law. Is that all right?
Yeah.
All right. That's an easy change, very direct and to the point.
And also on the last page, the top of the page, is it the Norwalk Facilities Construction Commission? Is that
Yeah,
correct?
that's the commission we got rid of,
Okay, but
NFCC.
so that's got to come out.
Where is it?
It's on the last page above, just above 1024, so it's got to be 1023, the last comment.
Yeah,
B.
this is Tom again. That was the transition statement when we got rid
Yeah.
of the NFCC. So this,
I'm getting rid of that whole that
Yeah.
whole section except for one reference, so that'll be out. And then the last thing is set 10-24. I asked the Speaker of the House, who's your bond counsel, to give me new language for the borrowing provision. And it's simple, to the point. I think Commissioner Wasuna should like it, I hope. And it does reference the controller. You note in most other provisions, I eliminated the controller and put the CFO in. In this case, the controller actually does play a role. And so that language was drafted by Matt Ritter, who is bond counsel. I always run the bond provisions by bond counsel. So I just wanted to point that out. And Henry was comfortable with that, very comfortable with that provision. So that replaces 3 paragraphs that are in the current charter.
Very clear.
Yeah, and all the all of the footnotes have been updated to reflect the changes. So you will see in the footnote to section 10-24 that basically, we basically repealed the other provisions that were in the historic charter. That are in the current charter. So I could run a red line to show the elimination of that, but I think that we'll probably rely on our annotations to show those changes as well.
Okay.
That's all I have.
We got through it. Wow. So next step, you clean this up. We tackle this at our next meeting or not?
I would strongly recommend it, and I will try to have some drafts. I think this will still be a considerable discussion for our next meeting. I will try to start looking at Articles 1 and 2, if not for the next meeting, for the meeting following that. I will take these changes. I will have continued dialogue with Henry. If the president and Councilman Livingston don't have a problem, I will call them as well, have further dialogue with them, particularly on the capital side, to make sure we got that done. And I will really try to see if I can streamline the language as much as possible and see if we can start to create a model section that we can build the rest of it with. So I will do my best. One of the things I do try to do is I try to break it down. If you take a look at the current language versus what we've done here, is I've broken it down into sections and subsections, and I try to title things so that people can see what's in the document. There's nothing I hate more than just a page of words with no breakdown. And so I've got to take it one step further and really try to clean it up. So at the next meeting, you will have, I would say that we should probably plan on working on this document.
Okay, so just on this document.
I will also try to do a draft. I will try to go through Article 1 and 2, possibly 3, to have some draft language for that as well. But I will do my best to get that done as well.
I don't have the calendar in front of me, but the first Wednesday of January is what? Anybody?
The 4th.
Yeah,
The 4th.
okay. So that doesn't give you a lot of time over.
No,
the
that's why I thought the budget would be the right thing to do, that can get done. And also I'm traveling in the next few days myself. So, but this is my job. I will get it done
Okay.
for you. I will get it done.
Okay, does anyone have any comment or questions?
No, just to say thank you, Steve. I mean, Angela, this has been it's a lot of work, and we all appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate
I'll
it.
second that.
Yes. And
Yeah,
I feel like
yeah.
we're getting into the nitty gritty, so that's good.
Yeah. Thank everybody. And look, your job is to hold me to hold my feet to the fire and make sure that we get the best document we can out of this. And again, it's your city, not mine. Although I love all the cities I work for. So I will point out for the record.
Well, we're the best.
You are the best.
We are definitely.
Tonight, you're the best. Tomorrow night, it'll be.
Well, I don't know about that.
Give me a little break here. I've got to go from town to
Take a
town.
vote. I have to take a vote on that. And I
Just,
just wish everybody happy holidays. Greg?
Before Greg Burnett, you mentioned the first Wednesday in January. That would cause a conflict for Tom and myself because we have a land use meeting on the
Okay.
first Wednesday.
Okay, well, we set the agenda. I don't know how we.
Yeah, well, this is Tom. Greg, you're absolutely right on that. And I was thinking that I can try and get my comments to Steve beforehand.
Yeah, I'm planning on talking to both of you. So I will, I want the two of you, if you don't mind, to look at this very critically and carefully. And I will try to have conversations either together or separately with the two of you so that your views will be reflected completely and we'll have an opportunity to go through things if you can't make that meeting. And certainly, Mr. President, the commission, I can't imagine would not want to hear from you if you aren't at that meeting. If there's something in it that concerns you, I imagine they would certainly take that into account.
Is that meeting a budget review at all, or is it something?
No, that's our regular monthly meeting.
Okay, so it's not the budget?
No.
No, okay. No preliminary budget.
Nope.
Okay. Okay, any other comments, questions? Well, I hope everybody has a wonderful holiday season and stay healthy.
Same to you. Thank you.
You too.
Merry
Stay
Christmas.
warm
Bye.
wherever you might be headed.
Adjourn.
Stay warm. Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Yes, yes,
Take care.
yes. Motion to adjourn, please.
Happy New Year, everybody.
Motion
Happy
to
New Year.
Thank you. All those in favor? Aye,
Bye.
we're adjourned.
Happy holidays, Merry Christmas.
Yes.
Thank you.
Not what this thing.